So in the last meeting, we stopped at the exchange rate regime, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start from the fixed exchange rate regime. This is the definition of the fixed exchange rate regime. So from this definition, we can see that in this exchange rate regime, the central bank announced an official exchange rate, and they commit that they will intervene the market to keep this the exchange rate around the official level, and they don't need to keep exactly to the level of the official exchange rate. They allow the fluctuation around a narrow band. The narrow band usually plus or minus 1 or plus or minus 1.5 or up to 2%. So in that band, we call the narrow band. What are the advantages and disadvantages of this exchange rate regime? In the last meeting, I asked you to search for the answer, right? And if you read the slide carefully, you can see already provide some key points about the advantage and disadvantage. But the thing is, you need to understand this advantage deeply. Okay, this is the list of the advantage and disadvantage. Now, please briefly explain. Nguyễn Việt Thành.
I just clicked wrong. I just misclicked. Sorry.
Okay. Please have a look on the list of the pros and cons of the fixed exchange rate regime and try to explain them.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Okay, first for the advantage, why the fixed exchange rate regime promotes the international trade and investment activities. And in the second point, how the fixed exchange rate regime enforce macroeconomic policy to be more disciplined. And in the third point, why the fixed exchange rate regime promotes international cooperation. Okay, Linh Dương, please.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
With the first one, in fixed rate, the government have the right to maintain. They have to maintain the exchange rate to stick at the fixed rate, so it is more safe and it's remaining stable. That makes the business environment more low risk, and it make international trade and investment more attractive.
So what kind of risk here? So you mentioned that they lower the risk, right? And I want to ask you, what kind of risk here?
About the inflation or
The
other.
inflation risk.
Yeah, when the government control it may be more stable.
But stable in what sense? In terms of what?
The value of the currency won't be too
Okay.
fluctuate.
Okay. The value of the currency, the domestic currency in particular. So in here, the fixed exchange rate, by maintaining the fixed exchange rate, the government can reduce the exchange rate risk. Okay. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So they keep the value of the domestic currency stable. Okay. So it can help to promote the international trade and investment. Okay, how about the second part? So you want to answer?
And to make it more efficient, so the government should have strict rules to maintain the exchange rate to be efficient. So the central bank has the power to maintain the rate.
Yeah, okay. When the taxes of the central bank is to maintain the fixed exchange rate, the central bank have to follow or to implement the policy to achieve this objective. Okay. So, in the case of Vietnam, when we have the multiple objective, like the central bank have to support the government to achieve the growth, the economic growth, to achieve the low level of the unemployment, and also to maintain a stable value of the domestic currency. So you can see that the central bank in Vietnam, State Bank of Vietnam, have a multiple objective, and it's really, really difficult to achieve a lot of the objective at the same time, right? So in the case, the government want to achieve the high economic growth rate. So in that case, the central bank have to sacrifice its objective. So in this case, they let the value of the currency fluctuate wildly. Okay, so that's explain the second point. How about the third point? The third point. So, okay, I want to ask someone else. So, who can answer the third point? Why the fixed exchange rate regime promote the international cooperation? Can you please?
As I think, because we have the government have the rule um, uh, to change the type of our domestic currency. So in that, so they can make it valuable to the exchange rate, so that it will not be inflation.
Okay, think about that. If the central bank want to foster the export, how should the central bank do?
The central bank could do the export.
To promote the international trade, to promote the export, how should the central bank do?
They can lower the exchange rate currency.
Lower the exchange rate, or lower the value of the domestic currency. They are different.
lower the value of the currency.
Okay, or devaluate the currency. In the case of Vietnam, when we quote the USD against VND, the central bank will increase the exchange rate, right?
Yes.
Devalue. So in that case, the Vietnamese dong become lower in terms of the value. So in that case, the Vietnamese product become cheaper, relatively cheaper, so we can export more. So that's the way the central bank can do to promote the international trade or the export. Okay, and we can see that if the central bank of one country devaluate its currency, and they can promote the export of that currency. And if the central bank of that trading partner do the same, so in that case, there occur the currency war, and it's increase the inflation in both countries. So if the central bank among the country they doing the same, so in that case, the currency war continues to occur, and is dampen the economic situation of the global economy, and is not good at all. So by keeping by maintain the fixed exchange rate, so we it prevent the currency war from the central bank. So we can promote the international cooperation. So that explains the third advantage. When we come to the disadvantage, the first one is the fixed exchange rate regime often under great pressure from the external shocks and domestic market. The second disadvantage is speculators are more likely to perform speculative activities that destabilize the economy. And the third point, the central bank lose the dynamism of the monetary policy, making the central bank difficult to change the amount of the money supply. So those are the disadvantages that a country suffer when they maintain a fixed exchange rate regime. For the country that follow or make announcement that they follow the fixed exchange rate regime, whether they continue to maintain or to keep this regime depend on the size of the reserve asset that the central bank holds. Because to keep the exchange rate stable, the central bank have to actively intervene the market. And if the size of the foreign reserve is small, so the central bank may run out of all of the foreign reserve, and they cannot have any fund to intervene the market. Okay, so it really depends on the size of the foreign reserve that the central bank holds, and usually for a central bank, the optimal level that the optimal level of the foreign reserve a central bank of a country holds is equal to 3.5 to 5 the value of the export per month. The optimal value of the foreign reserve a central bank need to hold equal to at least 3.5 the value of the import that country import each month. That is the optimal value. Now we come to the second regime, the floating exchange rate regime. Okay, this is the definition of the floating exchange rate regime. Please have a look. So from this definition, we can see that if the central bank follow or apply a floating exchange rate regime, they allow the market force to determine the exchange rate in that country. So in particular, the supply and the demand of the foreign currency will determine the exchange rate. And the central bank doesn't intervene the market to set or to achieve the exchange rate at the level they want. The central bank can join or can make a transaction in the forex, but without the objective to intervene the market. Okay. Please remember here is that in the floating exchange rate, the central bank can join the market or can make a transaction in the forex. And when they do so, they just play a normal role like other actors or other players. And they can make a transaction to adjust the foreign reserve, or they make a transaction in terms of the in charge of the government. And in this type of regime, they don't intervene the market. They just make ourselves at other player. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of this type of exchange rate regime? What are the benefits and the drawbacks of this type of regime compared to the fixed exchange rate? Thank please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think the benefit of the floating currency exchange is first, it's allow greater change in internal policies. Second, is less power on central bank exchange occur automatically, and finally, is no need for large reserves.
Can you repeat the first point?
The first point is allow greater change in internal policies.
Okay. So it allows the central bank to have better the independent policy, right? Because when the central bank don't need to tax it to maintain the fixed exchange rate, the central bank can focus on other objectives.
Yes.
That's the first point. And the second point,
The second point is less power on central bank exchange occur automatically, so the central bank can nó không bị can thiệp vào mọi thứ.
so what are the difference between the first and the first 2 points?
The first wait, I think it's this the bank didn't have all power, so not just the policy and the bank can can thiệp vào in all the aspect of them.
Okay. What is the third point?
The third point is it's no need for large reserves.
Okay, the central bank don't need to keep a large the foreign reserve.
Yes.
What else?
I just only found 3 that.
Okay. Thank you. So, any ideas about the advantage of the floating exchange rate regime? That please.
I think it's because the central bank no need to maintain a fixed rate. The money policy will become more independent, and the economic will become more independent because it's no longer a fixed rate.
The economy become more independent.
Yes.
Or less independent? Why? More independent, right?
Yes, because
why is that?
Because it's no longer because the central bank no longer interfere to keep a fixed exchange rate, so the economy become more independent. So as the monetary policy.
You mean that the monetary policy become more independent, or
yes.
the economy become more independent?
I think the economy become more independent as the central bank no longer interfere with the exchange rate.
Okay, as I understand, the economy become more independent from the central bank, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. When most developed country they implement the floating exchange rate regime, and when they apply the float exchange rate regime, the central bank just indirectly intervene the markets. They just indirectly intervene the market, not directly. Okay, and the economy become more independent from the central bank or from the monetary policy. Okay, it's good. What else? Việt Thanh, do you have additional point?
Not yet.
Okay, I see Linh Dương.
Well, I think this regime reflects the market supply and demand. So the central bank doesn't need to require it isn't required to constantly maintain the exchange rate with specific boundaries. So, for example, the investor could invest funds in whatever country that had the highest interest rate. It is
So
not limited.
So, what is the main point here? So the investor can do what?
It could invest funds in whatever country that had the highest interest rate.
So you mean that if own country implement the floating exchange regime, so the investor
It may be beneficial for the investors if they have more choices.
okay, they enlarge the investor have a broader set of the choice.
I think so.
Mm-hmm. Or another way to interpret this one, if the floating exchange rate regime, if applying the float exchange rate regime, so the exchange rate may fluctuate, and that give more chance for investor, especially for the speculator, right? If own country implement the fixed exchange rate regime, so it means that the exchange rate are quite stable, and there is no chance for the investor. But if the central bank lets the market decide the exchange rate, so it can be the case that the exchange rate fluctuate, and when the exchange rate goes up and down, and it bring the opportunity for the speculator, like the case of the stock market, right? If the stock market are stable, so there's no opportunity for the speculator. Okay, it's good. What else? How about the effectiveness or efficiency of the market? Who can exploit this point? The effectiveness or the efficiency of the resources allocation if the central bank set the price or set the exchange rate, and usually that exchange rate differ from the equilibrium exchange rate, and in that case, it distort the market. Distort the market in terms of like the resources allocation. If the central bank lets the market decide, or the exchange rate it decide at the cross of the supply and the demand. Okay, so it does in that case, exchange rate is equal to the equilibrium the equilibrium level. In that case, the market will allocate the resources efficiently. So another advantage of the floating exchange regime is that the market will be most efficient in terms of the resources allocation, because we have the exchange rate are determined by the interaction of the demand and supply. In the fixed exchange rate regime, however, the exchange rate level is set by the central bank, and it differs from the equilibrium level. So in that case, it distorts the market. Okay, so the resources in the economy do not allocate efficiently. So those are the advantages of the floating exchange rate regime. How about the disadvantages? What are the disadvantages of this type regime? Nhật Thành, please.
I think floating exchange rate have a higher volatility, so which make the increase the exchange rate risk that financial market participants have to face. So they have to allocate the substantial resource to predict the change in the exchange rate.
Okay, thank you.
The floating rate have a trend that to make the existing problem become even worse. For example, if the country have already experienced the economic problem like higher inflation or unemployment, the floating exchange rate can make the situation become more worse. Yes.
Okay, so how many points you have?
I think 2 points.
2 points. So the first one is the high volatility of the exchange rate, and it does increase the exchange rate risk. And because of high volatility, so it decrease the investor or the trader, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the first point. What is the second point?
Is the tendency of it, that make situation of the economy become even worse.
The tendency. What do you mean by that? I see that it's something related to the first point. It's related to the risks.
Because it depends on the first point. So.
Yes. Do you have another points that quite different from the first one?
No, not really. I only think of that.
Okay, thank you. So, who else? Nhung, please.
So, I think that the fluctuation of in exchange rate may encourage speculative movements of money from country to country, so they cause more and more exchange rate fluctuations.
So you mean that this type regime allows the speculator operate?
Yes, so speculation.
Speculation activities. Okay, and in the case of the Asian crisis in 1997 in Thailand, for example, Indonesia, for example, especially for Thailand, that's connect the role of the browser.
And the need to maintain an exchange rate impose a discrete line upon the national economy. It is quite possible that with a floating exchange rate, in a short run, problems can, as domestic inflation may be ignored until they make a crisis situation.
Can you re-explain this?
I mean that in the short run, the domestic inflation may be ignored. Yes.
Why in the short run the inflation may be ignored?
Because if the the price of currency of domestic currency is high, then it may cause the inflation.
Okay.
But they ignore that because the business is as exchange rate increase.
Maybe we not use the suitable context to understand your point.
Yes.
If your inflation put in the like a suitable context, so everyone can understand the point. Okay.
And because it's floating exchange rate, so it uncertainty.
Yeah. So it generate the high uncertainty or the volatility. The volatility of exchange rate is create the uncertainty in one country. Okay. So and that's good for the economy. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So so far we learn about the fixed and the floating exchange rate regime, and we can see that they have both pros and cons, right? So they are like the in the stand as an opposite way. So now we study the third exchange rate regime, a combination between them, the managed floating system. The managed floating exchange rate regime is a combination of the floating and a fixed exchange rate regime. So what is this? In the managed floating system, the central bank doesn't set a central official rate. And the central bank, like they only provides a band, like a plus or minus 2%, 3%, or even 5%. And the central bank, they don't intervene the market to keep the exchange rate at some level. In the managed floating exchange rate regime, the central bank allows the market to decide the exchange rate level. But when the exchange rate fluctuates outside the band, the central bank will intervene to keep the exchange rate fluctuation within the band. So in particular, we can think that in daily transaction, like the central bank will focus or anchors to the exchange rate by the end of its daily transaction, by the end of the day. Okay, so suppose that So by the end of today, the exchange rate of the Vietnam, of the USD against VND is 23, and the central bank will announce the band like a plus or the -2%, plus or -2%. So in the managed floating system, in the next day, the central bank allows the market to decide the exchange rate. But if the exchange rate fluctuate or the decrease or increase outside 30,000 plus or -2%, the central bank will intervene the market to keep the exchange rate fluctuate within 23,000 plus or -2%. That's the way the managed floating exchange rate operates. Okay. Let me draw on the board to show you. For the managed floating system or for the managed floating exchange rate regime, the central bank doesn't announce any central rate. They may use the interbank exchange rate or the exchange rate of the interbank at the end of the previous day. To see that, suppose that by the end of today, the average of the interbank market is suppose that at this level. Okay. In the next day, and suppose that the central bank announced a narrow band plus or -2%. Okay. In the next day, the central bank allow the market to decide the exchange rate. Okay. But if the exchange rate increase or decrease outside the this level, okay, if the exchange rate fall outside this level plus and -2%, in that case, the central bank will intervene the market to keep the exchange rate fluctuate around 33,500 plus -2%. Okay, and let's see, by the end of next day, by the end of tomorrow, the exchange rate just around this. Okay, and the idea is that in the following of the tomorrow, the central bank will apply the same logic. So the central bank will use this level, okay, and they keep they allow the market to decide the exchange rate level. But when the exchange rate fall outside 23,550 plus and or the -2%, in that case, if the central bank will intervene the market to keep the exchange rate fluctuate around this band, and that's the way the central bank will operate under the managed floating regime. And for the central bank, they may use different angle. Okay, in my example, the central bank used the average of the interbank market by the end of the previous day. But the central bank may use a different angle. Okay, they may use they may refer to different exchange rate to implement their policy under the managed floating exchange rate regime. it's clear enough for the third regime.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that's the way the central bank implement the managed floating exchange rate regime. And remember that in reality, the central bank may use or may refer different exchange rate. So in my example, I refer or I anchor to the average interbank exchange rate by the end of the previous day to implement the policy or the exchange rate. But the central bank may refer to different exchange rate level. But in any way, the central bank have to announce the types of exchange rate or the anchor they use. And a lot of countries, they use the third exchange rate regime, the managed floating system. Okay, now we studied the role of the central bank, and so far we studied the concept, and now we use the diagram to see the way the central bank implement the monetary policy. Okay, first, for the fixed exchange rate regime, okay, first for the fixed exchange rate regime, suppose that so we have in here we have the exchange rate of the pound against the USD. So in this exchange rate, the pounds plays as commodity currency and USD plays as term currency, right? And we assume that the demand for pounds decrease. First, let's look on the panel A. Panel A, we use the two-dimension graph. In the horizontal axis is the quantity of pounds, and in the vertical axis is the exchange rate. And at the initial equilibrium, we have the intersection between the S0 and D0, okay? So point A is the initial equilibrium. So now suppose that the demand for pulse decrease. Suppose that the demand for power decrease. Okay. Why the demand for power decrease? Can you give me an example, some example to explain why the demand for power decrease? When we analyze the monetary policy, we just have the information or we just make a simple assumption that the demand for power decrease. But we should connect to the real economy. We try to explain why this happened, why the demand for power decreased. To do that, we need to connect to the supply and the demand, right? To supply and the demand of the foreign currency. And in the previous meeting, so I provide you the how to derive the supply and the demand of the foreign currency, right? For the demand of the foreign currency, so we think about the need to import the goods or to import a service or to invest abroad or to pay for the non-resident, right? Do you still remember? To do that, we need to come back this slide to start to know the okay. Please come back to this slide and take a look. Before we move on, you should know the way to derive the supply and the demand, the sources of supply and demand of the foreign currency. Okay. So is the source of the supply and demand of the foreign currency, and from that we can derive the supply and the demand curve, and we draw the supply and the demand curve of the foreign currency in the two-dimension axis. So we have this the demand curve of the foreign currency, and this is a supply curve, right? Okay, and let me come back to this one. Okay, suppose that we have a demand, we observe a demand for power decrease. So there are lots of reasons explain why the demand for power decrease. For example, the imports decrease, or like we invest less on the foreign currency, or we receive less, or we pay less for the non-resident. So that may explain the demand for pounds decrease. And in general, we focus on the flow of trade. So you may simply explain that the demand for power decrease because there's a decrease in the import value. Okay. I'm sorry for why. It's I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, we continue. So in this scenario, we suppose that the demand for powers decrease, and we can make a simple explanation. That's because there's a decrease in the import, import need or import demand. So on the panel A, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. In the panel A, so we have the initial equilibrium is the cross section of the supply and the demand at 0 and D0, and the initial equilibrium at the A point. Okay. So when the demand for powers decrease, so we have a shift from D0 to D1. So when the demand for power decrease, so the demand curve shift to the left, right? The demand curve shift to the left, and we have a new equilibrium, the point B. This is point B, right? So we can see that there's a decrease in the exchange rate. The exchange rate decrease, right? From point A to point B, the exchange rate decrease. So how should the central bank do to maintain the exchange rate in this case? Do you see the scenario? So we have a Bùi Ngọc Nhung, please.
So I think that the central bank should decrease the supply of power in the market. They should decrease the supply. They should buy the foreign. They should buy the power. Yes.
They buy the power in the market.
Yes. Buy the power. Yes.
Okay, when they buy the power, so the supply curve shift to the left, right?
Yes, I think that.
Thank you. Do you have
I have the same answer with you.
Okay, the same answer. So in here we can see that when the demand for power decrease, the demand curve shift to the left, and there's a decrease in the exchange rate. Okay, and to keep the exchange rate at the initial level, the central bank have to shift the supply curve to the left. How to do that? When the supply curve shift to the left, it means that there's a decrease in the in the foreign exchange, in this case, there's a decrease in the supply of the power, right? So to decrease the amount or the supply of the power, the central bank have to buy the powers, right? Have to buy the powers to reduce the supply of the power in the market. When you use the power and the USD, you may feel difficult in the way to explain. Let me use the USD and VND. I think in this scenario, it's easy to understand. So we have the demand and supply. Okay, suppose that in this case, I use the USD against the BND. This is the initial level, point A. And suppose that there's a decrease in the demand of the USD. So it shifts the demand curve to the left. And I have here the D1. Okay. At this, when the demand curve shifts to the left, is the new equilibrium. So in here, I have the E0. In here, I have the E1. Okay. And there's a decrease here. I use this arrow. There's a decrease in the exchange rate. Because in here, we assume that the central bank implement the fixed exchange rate. So the central bank need to do something to shift, to increase the exchange rate to the back to the initial level. So in this case, the central bank shift the supply curve to the left, right? And how to shift the supply curve to the left? So there should be a decrease. There should be a decrease in the supply of the USD. When the supply of the USD decrease, the central bank have to buy the USD in the market, right? The central bank have to buy the USD in the market. So in that case, there's a decrease in the supply of the USD. So, and that shift the supply curve to the left. So in that case, we have here. So at the new equilibrium, we have the cross section of the E1 and of the S1 and the D1, and this is the new equilibrium. Okay. So that's the way the central bank do to maintain the exchange rate. if we use the exchange rate of the UND against VND. So I think in this closely context, you may understand better. Okay, now it's your turn. So in the second scenario, suppose that there is an increase in the demand. Okay, so please use a two-dimensional graph to explain how what happened when there is a decrease. What happened when there is an increase in the demand of the USD, and what should the central bank do to maintain the exchange rate? Okay, who can do the second scenario when there is an increase in the demand of the USD? So what happened in this case, and how should the central bank do to keep the exchange rate stable? So who can answer this question? Any answer? Okay, Khánh, please.
If the demand increase, the demands it will change to the right side.
Okay, we use the correct term is the shift to the right.
Shift to the right side.
Okay, shift. Okay.
So the new balance point is
the initial, okay? This is the new equilibrium, right?
yes.
Okay, so what else? So that's an increase in the exchange rate.
And increase in the quantity.
Okay. So how should the central bank do in its exchange rate regime?
The central bank will raising the rate as the supply. So that
Okay, so what should the central bank do?
rise the rate, exchange rate.
Have to reduce the exchange rate, right?
Yes.
How to do that?
They can reduce it by I haven't had the answer yet.
Okay, that please.
I think the central bank will sell more USD in
Okay.
order to bring the rate down. So they
Okay.
increase in the quantity of the USD.
Okay, the central bank will increase the supply
Yes.
by selling the USD. So the central bank holds the foreign reserve in hand, right?
Yes.
So now the central bank will use its foreign reserve to sell in the market, and in return, the market will pay the central bank the VND.
Yes.
Is it clear? Okay. So in here, the central bank, the State Bank of Vietnam, will use its foreign reserve to sell in the market, to sell the USD, and that shift the supply curve to the right. Okay. And in here we have, you can see, it come back to the initial level of the exchange rate, right? And that's an increase in the quantity of the foreign reserve, the quantity of the USD transact in the market. Okay. Thank you. Let me correct one point. I think in last scenario I'm not show you the correct way. In the last scenario, we have there's a decrease in the demand, right? And let me correct this part. The way the central bank do to maintain the exchange rate, if there is a decrease in the demand. In last scenario, we have that's a decrease in the demand. Okay, the D1, this is the S, okay. And in here, in last scenario, we have there's a decrease in the demand, and that shift the demand to the left. And we observe that there's a decrease in the exchange rate. Okay, and in the fixed exchange rate, how should the central bank do? How should the central bank do? The idea of the intervention is that the central bank will buy or sell. So in this scenario, we can see that the central bank sells the foreign currency, right? So by using the foreign reserve, the central bank sell in the market. So in that case, there's an increase in the supply of the foreign currency. In this case, it's the supply of the USD. So there's a shift of the supply curve to the right. But in this case, when there is a decrease in the demand, and that shift the demand to the left, and it's reduced the exchange rate. So then we see that when the exchange rate decrease, the central bank have to do something to raise the exchange rate back to the initial level. And the central bank in here have to buy the USD, I mean the foreign currency. When the central bank buy the foreign currency, it means that there's an increase in the foreign reserve or the reserve asset of the central bank. And in this case, it shifts the demand back to initial level. In the previous board, I showed that when the central bank doing so, there's a shift of the supply curve to the left, but it's not correct. The activity of the central bank by buying the foreign currency, in this case, by buying the USD in the market, okay? So there's an increase in the demand curve, okay? And that shift the demand curve from D1 back to D. So in this case, it come back to the initial level. And please view this result. And please remember that the activities of the central bank is to sell or to buy the foreign currency, okay? And the direction of the intervention only the increase, okay? So in the left-hand side, we can observe that there's an increase in the supply of the foreign currency, okay? And in the right-hand side, when the central bank buy the foreign currency, there's an increase in the demand. In both transactions, the direction of the central bank intervention always an increase. But in the left panel, it's an increase in the supply. And meanwhile, in the right panel, an increase in the demand. And you should always remember that the direction of the intervention of the central bank is always increase, okay? Increase demand or increase supply, not decrease, okay? So let me correct this part, especially for the demand. Okay, Hong Nhung, do you have question?
Yes, I had already raised hand, but my question is, in the demand for pounds increase, so the demand line is demand of pound, but you say that the supply line is supply of USD. I confusing about it.
Okay, let me come back this. You mean this one, right?
Just the right hand side, yes.
The left or the right?
The right.
The right. Okay, the right. But I have not just explained the right? I just focus on, in the previous part, I just explained the panel A.
Oh, really? I think that in the box you explain the right.
Because we assume that there's a decrease. Let me see. In the previous part, we assume that the demand for power decrease. So D0 shift to the left. Okay. And in panel B, the assumption should be there's an increase in the demand of the power. So the demand curve shift to the right from D0 to D1. So panel A and panel B are different scenarios. The reason why I use the USD against VND, because it's easy to understand. USD is the foreign currency and VND is the domestic currency. Okay. But on the slide, on this slide, when we use the pounds against the dollar, pound is the commodity currency, but we understand that the pound here is the domestic currency. So because it have the indirect quote with the US dollar, so it may a bit difficult when we stand from a view of a country, of the domestic country.
Well, I mean that tức là cái đường cầu ấy, thì thầy lại bảo là đường cầu của bảng Anh, còn đường cung thì thầy lại là đường cung của USD, thì em không hiểu chỗ để làm. Em nghĩ là đường cung cũng phải là đường cung của bảng Anh chứ ạ?
Commodity currency. Okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake about that. When we draw the two-dimension graph, okay, and we focus on the commodity currency in the exchange rate. the S and D here is the supply and the demand of the commodity currency. Okay.
Yes.
Now it's okay, right?
Yes. So
When we draw this, we focus on the commodity currency, and it should be the supply and the demand of the commodity currency. Okay.
so in the horizontal line, it is quantity of USD of dollars, right?
The pounds. In the exchange rate of the pounds against USD, pound is the commodity currency. Is it right? Remember, we have the 5 currency that are indirectly equal to the USD: British pound, euro, FDR, and dollar, Australia dollar, and New Zealand dollar. Okay. These 5 currency indirectly quoted against the USD. And we treat the USD as a foreign currency, and other currency is the domestic currency, for simply. Ling Jiang?
I thought the SDR was the special drawing right. Why is it a currency?
The SDR?
The SDR, you said
Yes.
it was one of the 5 currency.
Yes, special drawing right is a special currency. And I remember that I explained on the class, right? It's a special currency invented by the IMF.
Oh.
And it's invented in 1969. And the purpose is to clear the balance sheets among the central bank. And the reason why they invented the SDR is because the shortage of the goals at the USD at the foreign reserve, and the IMF invented the SDR to help the central bank, okay, to have more option, to keep the foreign reserve. So in addition to USD and goals, monetary goals, the central bank can keep the SDR as a foreign reserve. And it's special because the SDR don't have the physical appearance like a banknote, like a monetary note, like a Vietnamese dong note. Okay, they don't exist in the physical form. They just exist in the accounting sheets. Okay, and that's knowledge I remember that I introduced to you in the chapter 1. And please go back to the slide and take a look. Okay. For the exercise, for the problem set 3, I already upload the problem set 3, right? And we have some example, some exercise, the long question, right? And that's related to the supply and the demand curve. And please take a look and try to do them. And in the next meeting, I will go through them. We have the exercise part section, and we will explain how to do that type question. Okay. We still have a couple minutes, and I want to discuss about our final examination. For the midterm exam, we're gonna have midterm exam, I think, by the end of this week, maybe on Saturday or on a Sunday evening. From you may have the 40 minutes to 1 hour to do our first midterm exam, and this is the multiple choice question. Okay, and we have discussed in the Wednesday in our next meeting, and but prepare us. We're gonna have our first midterm exam in this weekend. Okay, please confirm that. But more importantly, our final examination. What is the form of the final examination? We now discussed about that. Because of the COVID-19, now the situation becomes severe, and we may have the online examination, and we may have like a kind of project, and if you have to submit individual, we have the big project in this course to evaluate the final examination. And if you have the you do a topic and you to do with that, and it's will be due to replace the normal examination. Okay, and so I want just it's not official now. I just want to inform you before we decide. So you may prepare us. In this year, we have the different way to conduct the final examination, and you may have the project. You may need to do a project, and you may present that project to us, and we have not defined. We have not yet finalized the way to exam. To conduct the final examination, and I will announce the way we have the final examination as soon as possible. Maybe next week. Next week we try to finalize the way for the final examination. Okay. So, Trung Khánh, you have question?
As you said before, we have like 2 midterm tests. What about the other midterm test?
Yes, also the multiple choice question.
Okay, thank
yes.
you.
Okay. Any question? Okay, we stop now. Okay, thank you so much. So, and please prepare the problem set 3. Please have a look and try to do that by yourself first, okay, before we have the exercise section in our next meeting, okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. See you.
Bye.
See you.